Well, hello, and welcome back to my cellar. It's been a while since I did one of these by myself. We'll see how well I remember. I'm going to talk about DaveCon at the very end. And speaking of the very end, I do hope that once in a while you do follow and listen to the song and see my sponsor, and there's some clever pictures, and apparently they're messing with those all the time, so I have to go look at it every once in a while and see what they dug up. All right. These are comments from both the last Curmudgeon and from the live stream that we did. I run a DMD Club for a middle school, and I use tokens for plot points, which allow the kids to channel their suggestions. That is, a plot point equal a minor story edit. I was wondering, have you ever done something similar with groups? And or what are your thoughts on the idea? Well, I think it's an interesting idea. Very interesting, because it would pull them in, make them involved. Oh, by the way, yeah, I'm real pink, and this is pink, and I'm fooling with the lighting, and I had a bulb burn out, and I can't find a replacement for it yet. It's really a weird bulb. So no, I'm I'm not flushed. And no, I haven't spray painted the rocks. Anyway, back to in the games that I run now, the Wheel of Blame, a whole lot of twists and turns get done by what I overhear the players talking about, suggesting, thinking it might be whatever. So I use that quite a lot in the wheel. Now, in a campaign type game, perhaps within reason meaning that it doesn't bust some of the ideas I've got already in half. Sure, if it can be woven into the overall plot and storyline of the campaign. But I think it's a really interesting idea to use with your middle school group, because now I'm not sure how they get the tokens, or whether, I'm assuming that they have tokens, they spend it to take the story off in a different direction. And that's neat, because you're eliciting ideas from the group, and as well as the individuals. And interesting concept. I really like that. With my Wheel of Blame, which I ran 3 times last weekend, and it was great fun all 3 times. And I even had some 5e players in a couple of the games. The plot, the Wheel of Blame is very linear, but the order in which things happen or encounters arise is constantly changing as the game goes on, based on what I'm getting listening to the group, and I'm getting ideas from them for, this next one, I'll use that in this next one, and stuff like that. So I think any good DM, GM, whatever you call it, it's all about being nimble on your feet and your head, and in being nimble, being able to adapt and pick up or modify what they're giving you, or listening to something they said and stashing it away for later. All right. This one is, you may not like the answer. I have questions about the elemental plane of air. Why is it so difficult to explain or detail? How would characters travel in the plane of air? And there was an answering comment: airship, flying mount, flying carpet, etc. All right. when Gary got into all this planar stuff, and I published it in the Dragon, I published it under one of my standard imprimaturs, and it's not anything I'm really interested in, but I know a bunch of people will be. The planes, as I understand them in their original references, were where the plane of fire is where fire demons resided and fiery things resided, and the plane of water was where, etc., etc., etc. Now, the plane of air has always been the most difficult to grasp, because if only wind spirits and air demons and that exist there, wind spirits and that are essentially invisible. So how would you do that? Well, how I handle it, because every once in a while I'll make an encounter on the wheel, be in the air, on the, involving air. I give them funny boots that they spend a couple of turns rolling against their decks, figuring out the mastery of the boots, occasionally being dumped upside down and all their stuff falls out of their pockets. And that's one way. An airship's another way. However, it was always my understanding that an airship or those other flying things are not going to necessarily work, because the elemental plane of air is just air. And I never really got into it. I kind of thought it was a little silly, because everything had to, if there was one of these, we had to have one of this. So everything was always, balanced out, and here's air. Okay, I can't, I really can't explain it much better than anybody else has done. It's, well, if it's infinitely high, you can't go there because there's no oxygen. And spirits of the air don't need oxygen, obviously. So, unless your campaign cosmology gets so involved that you travel to these planes, which is, hey, that's okay if you want to do it, but I'm afraid I can't tell you much how to do it. Sorry. All right, here's one right up my alley. How psychic should psionic PCs get to be? Let's establish that psionics should only apply to a very small, yes, a fraction of a percentage of PCs. Of that group, should all psychic phenomena be available to PCs as abilities, albeit not all at once, but tiered with experience level, such that the potential exists for mind reading, pyrokinesis, telekinesis, remote reading, and other such abilities as gained by the psychic's PC at some point. Well, seeing as how the whole psionic thing was centered around Dr. Strange, I'll say that if you choose and a character wishes to go study somewhere at a lamasery or a monastery or some sort of special school, that's entirely up to you as the DM, and entirely up to you as to the duration or even getting in, etc. And if the player is willing to have one of his characters set out for a year of campaign time, some campaigns run agonizingly slow, Some campaigns jump in leaps and bounds. A year of campaign time may only take 3 or 4 months of real time to transpire, and so that's entirely up to the player if he wants to do that, and it's entirely up to the DM how smart you want to let him get to be. Now, granted, Doctor Strange is, especially the first movie, waiting for the second one in a few days. He's at this school for a period of time, some years. And that seems only fair if you are going to buy into the thing of the secret school of super duper people with mental. It's entirely up to you. I like Doctor Strange. I've made no Strange. That's probably the only of the Marvel comics that I really characters that I really got into, and yeah, all of those powers listed could possibly be obtained. However, keep in mind that in a fairly balanced, rational world, people with extraordinary powers become targets by unscrupulous and or evil characters who wish to either acquire the power for themselves, maybe they don't understand exactly how it works yet, or destroy the wielder of those powers as a threat to them. There's innumerable things you can do with those two concepts in a campaign. Sure, you can become really, really tough, but if you get to a position where you would reasonably be a threat, whether it was to somebody good, somebody bad, that's entirely how you weave your story. You would become a target, just as when you're known to carry some really nice magic item or possess some really wonderful weapon or that, you become a target because there's always somebody out there that wants what you have. All right. Question about hexes. How big do you make them for overland travel? I've seen some where it takes a day to cross a hex, and others where you can cross 3-4 in a day. What scale did you give for OD&D? 5 miles to a hex was the original old scale, and I always thought that was quite fine. Now, if you're plotting out a big world and you're stuck with 8.5 by 11 hex sheets, you got a problem. But a long time ago, I mean, so long ago they're kind of yellowed now, I found some hex paper that was a good, other way, it was a good this wide, and it's a huge pad, and of course with that, you don't, because with a gazillion little hexes on it, you just number the hexes, and then you keep a log, or whatever you want to call it, of what's in each hex. And you can do it just like in a rough outline form, because, whatever is or isn't there may or may not be triggered by the party going through it. Now, okay, given that a 5 mile hex, I would say that if you're going overland through plains and wheat fields and stuff like that with minimal natural barriers, 6 or 7 a day is not out of it's not unreasonable. If you wish to limit it to 5 based on hours of daylight or whatever, but a day's travel ought to be what? Now, if you're hacking through a jungle, 3 or 4 a day, because it's much rougher going. But I always thought 5 was nice. With a 5 mile hex, when you get something, you can get bigger hexes that you can then draw your detail of what's in here. Here's the sinkholes. Here's a flumeral. Whatever. You can do that. But I always like 5. And okay, if I had to have a strategic map to plot where what was going on, well, then I'd use a much larger scale and just figure there were X number of 5 mile hexes in one of those, and scale it up so that you're not papering your walls with a campaign map. I've been reading about the first years of TSR in the book Game Wizards. Author John Peterson, great book, mentions the strategic preview. Sounds funny. What did you think of it? It was something that came out of the art department. Unbeknownst to me, I think I may have only seen one, or maybe I saw one after. I don't remember if I saw it while I was still there, or if that was something that spun up in the art department that I was leaving and didn't see one until afterwards. I thought it was funny. I think anything like that, any publication like that, that talks about work and makes fun, is a big thing, a positive thing for morale. That, silent guy in the back who speaks for all of us. And it was funny. It was occasionally, the ones I've seen were a little sardonic. And it was a good thing. Anything like that is good for morale if everybody, when's the next one coming out? When they start asking that, then it's not only is it time, but that you're doing a good thing. Okay, where are we going? Okay, here's a thorny one, but what the hell? New topic, magic resistance. When would I apply magic resistance? Fireball, magic missile, yes, I presume. How about rock to mud, travel through area or wall of stone falling over a non-supported wall? Okay. A non-supported wall falling over on you is not magic. Now, it may have been toppled by magic, but when the oomph hits the wall and it topples, now it's purely gravity. Now, if the individual had a protective dome spell or something like that, then we deal with it in that fashion. Resistance to magic. We used to make rings, throw rings out in treasure troves and that were made you resistant to magic. +1, +2. I think I once made a +3 versus, magic, amped up your magic resistance. In that case, anything where it could be applied and are argued for, like in saving throws, absolutely use it. Saving throws are, let's face it, saving throws. You're in a 30-foot square room and somebody uncorks a fireball and you make your saving throw. That's still a hell of a lot of hit points. But it's an out. It's preposterous it may be. It's a possibly you won't die, even though logic says we should, because why? It's fantasy. You just got bitten by 3 poisonous snakes, you make your saving throw and you only get half damage. Okay, that's a little more. But what is your saving throw? Is that your ability to make a quick X and suck out the poison and spit it into the fire or whatever? It's fantasy. it, I guess I would apply it when and where it feels right. And I don't imagine that's real helpful. But I think every DM has to go with their gut. What seems right, their sense of fairness, their sense of fair play, their sense of, yeah, okay, that's plausible in my greater creation. And if it isn't, don't. Whether or not, all right, a magic missile, the old school magic missile that hit like a mortar barrage, had a saving throw. It only hit like half a mortar barrage. The new one has no saving throw. It hits. There, I might start applying a magic resistance if you had skill or experience or magic that would warrant it. That's a good place to put it. How does the monster, the wight, paralyze victims? Why are elves sometimes immune? Oh, wait. There's another question. All right, I'll answer this one, then we'll go back. In most of the early writings about wights, a lot of the early folk tales, which attributed various powers to the wights, and wights were known in several different cultures by different names, but they were relatively the same. A heavy preponderance of the description of a wight and encountering a wight had to do with just absolutely chilling. They sucked all the heat out of the air, and they sucked all the heat out of you, and sort of froze you into immobility. That's the basis, as I know it, of what Gary and Dave did with with the wight, and I don't know which one did which, but or who did it, but in any event, it was this literally freezing dread that would just render you incapable of movement. And wights, being level drainers, easily rolls over into, as they suck the warmth out of you, they start draining you of levels. Now, why are elves sometimes immune? I didn't know they were. I don't deal with elves a lot, and it's magic, it's fantasy. Elves are so much older, even before they go out into the world, than most of the humans that they interact with. The few that do, Tolkien was way too heavy on elves. The few that do are already much older, and perhaps less inclined to be frozen by that dread. You can find wights in several different cultures. Not everyone is exactly the same, but they're pretty much of a type. My first question is about hit points. You had mentioned hit points back in your first video, and how hit points were determined by your stats in certain circumstances, such as running an encumbrance. No. Running an encumbrance dodge and such. My question is, are hit points determined by your abilities? And if so, how? I've always gone by hit point by class. Fighter is a D10. Cleric is a D8. Right. Okay. That's right. No, I don't believe my explanation changed that. Okay, so hit points are determined the number of dice you roll, and some levels you don't get to roll another die, you simply get X number more hit points. As I've discussed many times, hit points are your overall ability to evade dying. Whether it's dodging a blow that would otherwise have been fatal, not dying to the scorpion sting. You can buff them up in that if you have higher strength, you'll get more hit points. If there are, dex or constitution, you get more. It's stamina, it's endurance, it's learned tricks, all jumbled into one big barrel. And I don't know a better explanation for it than that. All those things will determine your hit points. And then if you get a sash or bracers or something, they add more. They make you a little quicker, your reactions just a little sharper, or the bracer takes a blow and absorbs X number of hit points. Hit points are virtually every video game today has copied what we originally put out in D&D. Hit points, lives, leveling up, being drained. They're all there, even in the quick stick your quarter in and kill stuff games, let alone the, MMO, the massive multiplayers. Hit points are that thermometer on the side, or the number of hearts across the top, or whatever. It's things happen, and when you run out of them, your character's dead. Put in another quarter. I know, $1, whatever it costs today. Principle's the same. Find the potion in the little, looks suspiciously like a chemistry beacon. Get more hit points back. Those points enable Mario and Luigi to jump over turtles, because if they didn't have them, they get knocked over the side and they die. Well, at the root of it, that's pretty much the same as for hit points. You can get more, yes, by having superior stats, by other means that the DM wishes to allow you to do. Next question, races and what classes? What classes? All right. What effects do races have on your stats? Such as if I'm an elf, I get a bonus in a stat. No, not to my knowledge. I don't recall right offhand that. Well, there may be some racial preferences, but they would be outlined in the books. Movement? What determines movement? Race or class or ability? What determines movement? Movement is determined by your movement rate. And as I recall, those are published in all the editions. Well, maybe, I don't know. They're in O, and they're first and they're in second. So, what's your movement rate? Well, we were talking about that earlier with the Hexes outdoors. Underground, most creatures have like a 60-foot movement rate per turn. Turns, particularly in role-playing, are like watching a fist fight with a stroboscope. You only see part of it as it happens. And that's kind of the way it happens when you break it down into segments and everything. If you're a ranger, you could argue for a movement bonus outdoors. If you're, well, pick a race, and if you're an elf, okay, I can go faster through the trees. Okay, if I'm a dwarf, I can go faster underground. I believe they do already. That's what determines how fast you move. Now, if you've got some, and again, you're using the word ability, which means you're probably using some things I don't like anyway, which is skills and abilities. If you've got some super duper skill or ability that says you're 20% faster through the woods, or or whatever, that's up to your DM. This person has a lot of questions. Hit point advancement. How many points should each class get? Well, okay. How many points should each class get? Normally what I've done is passes. For each level you roll. For level you add a die for everyone. Okay, well that's basically what it is. Now, there are some higher level magic users, as I recall, and there may be some higher level clerics. They don't get a whole new die every time they go up. They get 2 or 3 hit points, not another whole die. You roll. If it says add a hit die, then you roll. And yep, if you only roll a 1, that's all you got. Oops. It happens. All right. What are my thoughts on the revelations about M.A.R. Barker? For those of you who don't know, M.A.R. Barker is the individual who created the world of Tecumseh and wrote the role-playing game. Well, wrote most of the principles and precepts of the role-playing game Empire of the Petal Throne. It has come to light recently that Professor Barker, under a pseudonym, wrote some virulent, some really harsh and critical stuff of an anti-Semitic nature. I don't know why so many people are so surprised to find this out when he studied Arabic cultures. The M.A.R., I believe, stood for Muhammad Abdul Rashid or Rashad or something of that nature. Barker. His first names were Muslim. No, not all Muslims are like that. Not saying that. However, that ought to mitigate a little bit of the shock to find out that he held some of those ideas. I think the stuff he wrote was reprehensible and despicable. To be fair, I never had much of an opinion of the man anyway. I thought he was a self-important, self-inflated blowhard who treated everybody that didn't have a PhD in Far Eastern Studies as a dunce or an imbecile. But hey, that's just me. Okay. What do we got going? Men in Magic suggests a ratio of 1 DM to 20 players. Ditto D&D. Games really have that many players around the table at the same time? Or did Gary perhaps envision the DM hosting multiple player groups in separate sessions? Well, you could have one guy have 4 groups going of 5 players each if he was a real glutton for punishment, or if he was running them all through the exact same thing, playtesting it. In the early days, when the rules were really simple, it was not that hard to run a group that large. My largest is the biggest one I ever ran was 17. I ran a bunch between 12 and 15 when I had first brought D&D back to college and everybody wanted to try it out. I ended up with about 10, of whom I could count 7 or 8 being able to play every week. I have a absolutely different technique when I run large groups than when I run a small group. Small group being 7 or less. 7 or less, there's a natural leader, there's a unity to the group. Now I'm talking about people that play together. Tournament's a whole different thing. This past weekend at DaveCon, I heard of a couple games that just fell all to hell and gone because there were too many alpha dogs in the group. When I first brought the game back to Carbondale, I got 6 or 8 people to try it the first day. They told a couple of the other guys, and I had 17 show up one day that wanted to play. I've had large groups when I had nothing planned. I relayed the table several years ago at TotalCon. I had an entire table and somebody had played and everything I brought with already. So I use the same technique. You usher the herd to a starting point. You let them into the pasture and you, what are you doing? Okay, what are you doing? Okay, what are you doing? Okay, what are you doing? Okay. Suppose you just took the group into a huge city and you go around because you're looking for something. By the time you get over here, you can probably think of an answer. Okay, well, you get this, you get that. What you're doing in this case is you are formulating the sequence of events and the adventure right there as it happens, with the ability to take it wherever you want at the same time. And counterintuitive, I understand, but by the end, by where they decide to go, you can decide. The same thing with a large group. What are you doing? What are you doing? Where are you going? Where are you going? Okay, what are you doing? All right, you found this. You didn't see anything. You got lost. And just go around the table. And that way, many more of the people feel like they're actually part of the game, as opposed to having 17 people sit around a table and one person basically be the caller. Old term we used to use for the person who, by consensus, led the group, asked the questions and whatever. And it makes it so much easier for the DM to deal with one individual at a time while not allowing that individual to dominate the party and not let anybody else that's involved contribute and be part of it and feel like they're in it. No, we never ever we never thought about running groups that big in tournaments. Good God, no. We were always short of people to run games for us at tournaments in the early years. And we used to run, when we ran the Giants, the G1, G2, G3, MetroCon, or Metro Detroit Con, I think we had parties of 9. There's so many people. And we had so few DMs that we were putting together parties of 9. 6 guys show up together and they all want to sign up together. That's fine. Get 3 more people that were over there as freelancers, whatever. Okay, this is your group. Go talk to each other. It'll be starting soon. Yes, you could run a game when the game was really simple. You could run it up to 20 players. I wouldn't have wanted to. I don't know that Gary ever did. Now, if you were doing a demo type game, yeah, you could do it. Because then you're just firing stuff back that you've already decided, You know, what's in that room, what's down that corner, what's in that batty belfry up there. You could do it that way. All right, have I ever played in a group that big? Oh. I've never played in a group that big. No, this isn't. All right. I'll answer this question. As I understand it, AD&D was formulated at least partly for large group tournament play at the nascent conventions, which is why I posed that potential reason. AD&D was formatted and produced so that we had finally a set of rules. That what's in these 3 hardbounds is it. No longer the 3 original brown books and then the 4 supplements and then, okay, this is it. And by doing that, we could get enough volunteer DMs that had the same basic fundamentals to call a game. Because tournaments were scored. They were graded. They were scored. And if you did these 3 objectives and and then okay, how many scored, and how many, and you went down until you had eliminated half of the previous field. By doing AD&D, that enabled us to have a standard set. These rules are verbatim as written in the tournaments. No homebrew variations. These are the rules. This is the way stuff will work. That was why we did it, because we were making bushel baskets full of money running tournaments. Bushel baskets full. Fun to know you have a Swedish heritage. Did you know that cask is the name of a drink you put vodka in, where you put vodka in coffee? Yes, I did. And it's also a slang soldier's word for a helmet or a tin pot or whatever. And that is where I got it from, because my grandpa was a socialist in the late teens and the early 20s, and was actually expelled from Sweden. So he went to Finland, and he found his first wife and snuck back into Sweden under an assumed name, Cask, and then emigrated to the United States, legally emigrated under an alias. That's how I got it. Yes, and it's probably not related to my family, but it is fun to know. Now, wrap up. Been on here long enough, I'm sure you're getting bored. I went to DaveCon last weekend in Minneapolis, held at a DoubleTree Inn, and I had a great time. The original purpose, as stated by the person who spearheaded all this, was to try to reconcile the 2 schools of arguing in philosophy, which are often the same, between the proponents and adherents to Dave Arneson and the proponents and adherents of Gary Gygax. As soon as this was announced, a big schism opened up in Minneapolis, and people started fighting about, you can't do this, only we can do it. The David Arneson estate got involved in it and tried to stick their oar in. And what could have been a much nicer, more cordial con ended up being a much smaller, very cordial con. A lot of fun. I personally had 3 games scheduled, and every game I had a table full of eager participants. At least 2 of the games I had 1 or more 5e players just came by to see what this is all about. Judging from the conversations we had after the games, judging from the number of player sheets I was asked to sign, I think we had a real good time. I heard nothing but good times. I came in one day at Saturday, and there must have been 80 people in these 2 small rooms I walked into playing games together. There was a 5e game there. I think at least this 5e DM is just probably a frustrated actor. But I admire the energy he put into it. I got to hook up with a couple of old friends. I hadn't seen Dave Wesley in more years than I wanted to think about. Hadn't seen Bill Hoyt in more years than I could think about. 2 stalwarts from back in the day of the Minneapolis group, because it was the Minneapolis group interacting with the Lake Geneva group, which often interacted with the Chicago group, that fomented all this creativity. It was great. People had a great time. Ernie was there. Ernie Gygax was there. I was there. And Dave Wesley was there. The Braunstein campaign was played again, which was kind of one of the, well, it wasn't kind of, it was one of the impeti. What's the plural for impetus? Anyway, it was one of those that started the ball rolling in Dave's head, and he told Gary about it. And anyway, it was, I watched a good deal of that, because it's not figures or anything rolling dice. It's like a really big diplomacy game, except fantasy. And it was a really nice con. It's a shame that some of the colossal egos up there couldn't put aside their colossal egos and come join in the spirit of, hey, let's all just get together and have fun. It's a real shame. And I don't know. Maybe there are just some people up there that are just so wrapped up in their own belief system that they can't step outside for a day and talk to the other guy. I don't know. It's a shame. We had a really good time. And for all of you who poo-pooed it up there, you really missed out, and you did it to yourself. And that's all I got. So I'll say, do dada govi.
Curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, a curmudgeon in the cellar.
Last man around when them rates went down. Calling Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought Psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. ESR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Titan with tramp under a tree, high as could be.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.